When you buy a house, a lot of money is going to change hands. There's a lot of costs. And if you're not careful, you're in for a big surprise. Hi, this is Don Reedy. And how about a session about what things cost and who pays for what? In the purchase of a home, a lot more is involved than just the price. Who pays for the inspections, insurance, title, escrow? What can you ask for? What should your strategy be? Let's take a look at the contract and some of the more important costs and who pays for what.
There's a lengthy section in the residential purchase agreement in Section 7 on allocation of costs. Let's cover these, and I'm going to talk to you from my perspective. Everything that's on this contract is negotiable. You can see that there's a box for the buyer or seller to pay, starting with inspections, reports, and certificates. It's generally accepted that the seller will pay for a natural hazard disclosure report. That's a report that talks about, is your home sitting in an earthquake zone? Is it apt to flood? Is it in a floodplain? Those are generally third-party generated reports that the seller provides so that the buyer knows they're not buying a property that's going to slip down the mountain. A frequently added inspection is the buyer's inspection, and that's the report that's done. The buyer pays for it. They get a inspector to come out and look through the property. We do a whole section and a video on that. It's very, very important part of this, and generally the buyer pays for that. The next area that we run into frequently is government compliance items. Those include things like smoke detectors and carbon monoxide. Those must be done. The seller does them all the time. If you get a loan, for instance, you can't even get an appraisal unless you actually have a carbon monoxide device installed prior to before the appraiser gets there. Let me point out, however, that just because they're required by the government doesn't mean that the seller has to do them. You always maintain the right to either walk away from the transaction and the purchase or to potentially do that work yourself.
Pretty complicated stuff, yes? All right, let's look at some more.
Continuing with our allocation of costs, let's take a quick look at the next section, which is escrow. And now remember again, we talked in our escrow section about how important escrow was. Here in Section C of the Section 7, we get to decide who that escrow holder will be, and that, as we discussed in the escrow section, is completely up to the buyer and the seller to decide. That's completely negotiable. As a general rule, but again, completely negotiable, the buyer and seller generally split the escrow fee, meaning each pays their own share of it, and that's fairly typical of most transactions. We see in this section a referral to owner's title insurance. Once again, that's the insurance that the seller's going to take out so that the buyer knows that the seller does in fact own that property. Seller's title insurance is almost always paid for by the seller. Let's talk a little bit more about these significant costs down here in Section C, other costs. Again, typically, but always negotiable, the seller generally pays for any taxes, transfer fees, homeowner association fees, or documentation. Another recent innovation is a home warranty. Home warranty is a pretty good idea. It generally costs between $300 and $400, and it can include, as you'll see down here, coverage for an air conditioner or a spa. The premise behind a home warranty is that the seller is just effectively indicating to the buyer that the house is in good shape, and if they happen to miss something, if something breaks in the first year, well, there's an insurance policy to take care of that. Generally speaking, the seller will pay.
Thanks. Thank you. I'd like to thank each and every one of you. Okay. All right. Listen. Thanks for stopping by and watching this video on real estate. If you liked today's topic or you have any question about real estate, just comment down below. Like us, subscribe to the channel, and come back always to see us. Thanks. I'm Don Reedy, the most interesting man in real estate. I'll be back to you before you can imagine. I'll be back to you in a flying moment. I'll be back to you in I can't even begin to tell you how fast I'll be back. I'll be back faster than lightning.